Happy Halloween, and welcome back to Unexpected Awesome for our Spooktacular special. This year, we're going to talk about a movie that's a minor cult classic to some of the most influential artistic minds of the 21st and 20th century, as well as an odd and intriguing little film in its own right. Today, we're going to talk about the forgotten B-movie backburner, that is, the Alligator People. The Alligator People follows a hypnotherapy session in which a pair of mental health professionals plumb the depths of the mind of a peculiar yet not unattractive nurse in their employ as she relays to them a possibly true, possibly spurious tale of a disappearing husband, a manhunt that leads to an aging plantation estate in the middle of the Louisiana bayou, and mad science experiments that threaten to swallow up her bow whole. The story is arguably predictable and very much of its time, coming across as the awkward offspring between the previously established masterpieces such as 1941's The Wolfman and 1954's Creature from the Black Lagoon in terms of setting, themes, characterization, and style. But the one thing that this movie has that those do not is essentially in terms of its framework, which in turn affects its tone and ultimately stylization. While the movie has all the trappings of a sci-fi horror creature feature, its tone and ultimately the method in which the story unfolds comes across more as a tragic romantic melodrama, where a driven leading lady, played excellently and independently by an unfortunately snubbed in her own time Beverly Garland, beautifully and determinedly scours heaven and earth through administrative records, personal histories, personal belongings, and eventually through the primeval bogs of the earth itself to find her mysteriously vanishing paramour. She spends the next several years searching through every documentation involving his personal life until finally she discovers the one singular administrative notation of his home address inside of a fraternity for an alma mater. So she takes the red-eye to go to the middle of Jim Crow nowhere, spying that the town is empty except for a piece of freight packaging. She's then picked up by the single most suspicious-looking Cajun in the world, played to cheesy magnificence by the late Creighton Chaney, who offers to give her a ride to the plantation house where he works, which incidentally is the very same place that was listed as the address at the fraternity. When she gets there, she meets the mistress of the house, Mrs. Henry Hawthorne, an elegant Southern Belle matronly type who is extremely cagey and insists that she stay in her room. After she locks her in her room and has her supper sent up, she decides to go out and visit the doctor to alert him of the situation, in which they discuss what can potentially be done to convince the newlywed leading lady to leave. While this is happening, a shadowy figure enters into the house and begins playing music on the piano, which in turn prompts our leading lady to use the key that she got from the help after delivering her supper earlier to leave her room and check and see what's going on. She sees her figure after she turns on the light and sprints out of the room in fear and terror, leaving nothing behind but sodden foot and fingerprints on the piano and carpet. She confronts the lady of the house the next day, bombarding her with questions until eventually the elderly lady yields and admits that the mysterious intruder, the young woman's mysterious vanishing bridegroom, and her son are one and the same man, and that a mysterious condition has afflicted him, which the doctor in the clinic has been working round the clock to try to reverse, with the newest course of action being doses of radiation to potentially stave off the mutation of the DNA. As such, she decides to go out there and talk to the doctor. And the next day, the Alligator Man returns to the house to talk to his mother about how to potentially convince his wife to leave so that way she doesn't see him as a hideous creature. She calmly approaches him, to which he then sprints off into the fearsome primeval Louisiana bayou again. She runs out after him, eventually getting lost in the rain and into an area filled with alligators, to which the hook-handed Cajun servant finds her and brings her into his hut, initially offering her an acrid drink of moonshine before coming on to her. Things are about to take a turn for the worse when the lost husband breaks into the shed and fights the Cajun into submission, safely escorting his newlywed estranged lover back to the mansion. Because of this, he goes up to the doctor, pleads with him to do the treatment as soon as possible, so that way he can go back to a regular person and be with the person that he cares about. The next day comes around, and while experiments are being treated on standard alligators to establish a baseline, in order to design the irradiation injections, our resident mad bayou scientists begin to explain to the leading lady exactly what happened. Upon the realization that the human physiology and lizard physiology are slightly similar, with the exceptional difference of the nervous systems and how they operate and how they maintain limbs and tissue, the doctor decides to experiment with organic chemicals such as hydrocortisone to see if it can stimulate regeneration and vitality in the flesh. He does so with volunteers and funding set up by Mrs. Hawthorne, who wants to see her son restored to health after his plane crash, to which he does, and initially it starts off as very promising. Their health and their limbs have returned, and they seem to be in good condition, until eventually their nervous system starts slowing down, and their mental capacity starts going down as well, affecting their speech, their ability to rest, even their ability to react to temperatures. And so he starts working round the clock on his patients, his most desperate of which was Paul, whom he cables to come back for treatment to make sure his body doesn't mutate into a less than sentient form. He explains that they didn't want to deceive her, but they didn't want to have their research shut down so they couldn't cure the patients that they already treated. She expresses that she just wants to see her husband back and that she wants to be there for the treatment so that way she cannot be kept out of the loop again. He agrees, convinces Paul, her husband, that she should be present during the treatment, and thus that leads us to the 11th hour, the final section of the story. He's strapped in. The doctor expresses his regrets and sorrow about the negative aspect of the treatment. Paul gives out his apologies and gracious thanks for the help he's done, and thus the treatment ensues. It's looking strong, and then suddenly the Cajun bursts into the room, assaults the doctor, causes the machine to overload the radiation treatment, thus turning Paul from a scaly man into a full-on alligator creature, to which the swamp-dwelling country simpleton tries to attack him with his hook and electrocutes himself on the radiation machine, causing the building to light on fire in the electrical shortage, eventually leading it to explode, destroying any evidence that there was any research there in the first place. However, before this happens, the alligator creature that was once the paramour of our leading lady sprints off into the bayou, with our protagonist chasing after him, trying to reason with it and not lose it again. Eventually, after fighting an awkward-looking alligator prop, it ends up in quicksand and sinking to its death, which shocks and traumatizes our fair heroine into such a fit of despair and sadness that she shrieks out a soul-rending cry so passionate and so effective it makes Fay Ray green with jealousy from beyond the grave. And thus the film ends with our two doctors physically trying to figure out whether or not they should tell their patient of this suppressed memory or whether or not they should let her live in ignorance, remain happy. And thus, that's how the film ends. The Alligator People is hokey. It's not the best story in the world. Despite having a very emotionally involved story, the best parts of the movie are the dialogue and conversation between the doctor, the mother, the leading lady, and the Cajun. All those sections of the story are not divorced, but they're so vastly different in tone and execution than the romantic scenes of dialogue that it's night and day. Speaking of night and day, the technical effects of this movie are absolutely hit and miss. The makeup effects on the other patients and the leading man are somewhat convincing most of the time, until you get to the final act of the film, when the awkward suit and rubber mask that they put on the stunt actor to showcase his horrific final form, just you can see the seams around the neck connecting it to the suit on the actor. That and the actual alligators in the background of most of the scenes to establish tension are stiff and don't move all that often and are very unreactive. They're very clearly props. However, where the writing and the special effects fail, the acting more than delivers. The actress who plays Mrs. Hawthorne, Creighton Chaney, the gentleman doctor, and of course, Beverly Garland herself all deliver near masterful performances, pouring their heart and souls into otherwise schlocky material that almost no one else would take seriously. Even the actor for the leading man, despite not giving the best or most charismatic performances, and being hampered by a script that has him not tell people anything and being absent for the grand majority of the film, pours his absolute best into trying to make these cheesy lines work. As such, you have a film on its surface may look like a creature feature drive-in film, but its tone, heart, and soul is that of a tragic romantic melodrama, sold almost entirely by the grand performance of its leading lady. All in all, Alligator People is well worth a watch. It's free in a lot of places, with a solid performance from a starlet who never got to see her 15 minutes. Stay golden, spoop responsibly, and happy Halloween.
Am I dead or just asleep?